I had prayed, and my hands in the air, I just kept saying, God, please help me. Like, please help me, because I don't ever want to have a thought like that again. And I can remember just crying and asking for forgiveness and asking God to forgive me for being so angry.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Harbert, and this is my story. So I grew up in a Christian home. I had two very loving parents. There was my dad and my mom, and my mom was just always kind of the stronghold in our family of being like the strong Christian woman. She loved us so much as kids. I mean, growing up, I just remember like all I wanted to be as a grown-up was because of my mom, and she always had a smile on her face, had just the joy of the Lord in her heart, and was just always such a happy lady. And I honestly think that's why I kind of went into teaching, is because I was like, well, that's the closest thing to motherhood, I just want to love up on kids all day long. And so it was because of her that, a lot of things, she influenced my life in so many ways. So, just as a child, I remember just having the joy of the Lord in my heart, and was always just happy and smiling and just wanted to sing praises. And so we went to Happy Land Preschool. I went to Happy Land Preschool, and that's actually where I met Chris. And I can remember at the time, Miss Jan, who I'm now blessed to call Grandma Jan, was the teacher. And I can just remember in the little 3-year-old class, just she would talk to us about Jesus and how much Jesus loved us, and I was always just so excited to have him in my heart. And so I remember her just pulling me aside one day and praying with me and asking Jesus into my heart at 3 years old, and just feeling his love and his peace and his presence at such a young age. And then, I had this little blue cassette recorder that I would carry around everywhere, and had this microphone with praise songs from Happy Land. And I can just remember, probably to the dismay of most of my family, I would just sing praise songs all day long. That's just all I wanted to do, was just sing. And I still love to sing, but I don't have a beautiful voice. So I would just carry this thing around singing all the time. And I just felt God at such a young age and his presence in my life. And I can actually remember like 2 separate times when I was a little girl, just hearing the audible voice of God. And I know so many times you think like I so desperately wish I could hear that again, but I remember there were 2 different instances. One, we lived up in Rye, and I was probably about 4 years old, and my mom and I were driving up in our little Subaru hatchback car, and she had all the windows down, and her and I were just singing praise songs like we do, and we were just jamming out in the car, driving, and I just kept hearing this voice tell me, roll up the windows. And I was like, okay. So I told my mom, roll up the windows. And it was a hot summer day. The breeze was blowing through the car. And my mom just, how we as parents do. My mom just kind of looked at me, oh, okay, honey, and didn't do it, And so I remember telling her again, I'm like, Mom, roll up the windows. I kept hearing the voice, roll up the windows. And she still wouldn't do it. And I got real loud with her, and I'm like, roll them up now. And so then right as she rolled the windows up, our whole car just went black. It was absolutely black. We couldn't see anything. And it turned out we drove through this huge swarm of bees that just encompassed our car. And the crazy thing is, about 2 weeks earlier, I was with one of my cousins over at Monkey Mountain at City Park, and realized I was allergic to bees. I had got stung on the neck by a bee. And anyway, so my mom, I just remember her pulling the car over, and she's just, tears are flooding her face, and she's like, why did you tell me to roll up the windows? I'm like, because he told me to. She's like, who told you to? I'm like, he did, the voice. And she was just like, I just remember my mom just crying, and she's like, oh. And so that was the first time I remember hearing the audible voice of God, because it was so clear in my head. The second time, when I was in 1st grade, we were over at a friend's house, and I had an older brother, and was always just very, kind of a tomboy growing up, always outside playing basketball, shooting hoops, doing everything with my brother. And we were over at a friend's house, and we were outside playing basketball out on their little basketball court area, and their dog just kind of came up behind me and clipped the back of my leg, and just so happened that I just fell straight back and hit my head on the concrete. And my dad was there, and I can remember him coming out, and and I always thought it was the goofiest question, and I remember him scooping me up and how many fingers am I holding up? And I remember just starting to like laugh, but then I just started vomiting all over my dad and vomiting. And my mom was a nurse at St. Mary Corwin, and so I just remember him calling my mom and saying, Jennifer hit her head, we're gonna come in. And so she met us there at the emergency room, and I think my mom kind of thought, oh, it's no big deal. She's always messing around with her brothers, or her brother, and it'll be fine. And so I just remember my memories of that are just being in the emergency room, and they couldn't control my vomiting. And so pretty soon I was starting to throw up blood, and they just couldn't get it to stop. And so finally they were able to get me in for a CAT scan, and they told my parents I had a fractured skull and a subdural hematoma. And so basically what it was like a blood clot on the brain. And so unbeknownst to me at the time, they basically told my parents, like, we can't control her vomiting. We can't get her into surgery. There's very little chance she's going to make it through the night, is what they had told my parents. And, I don't remember a whole lot about it. I was kind of in and out, and I just remember just kind of throwing up all the time. And the only thing I do remember was I was laying in bed and wasn't really awake, but I just remember my mom just laying over me and just praying and praying and praying. And I can just like I wasn't really all there, but I just kind of remember just hearing her pray and praying in tongues. And I just kept hearing this voice, you're healed, you're healed. And so all of a sudden I just kind of wake up and I look at her and she's crying, and because I don't think at that point I had really been completely there. And so I looked at her, I said, Mom, it's fine, I'm healed. And she just kind of looked at me, and so then they were able to take me in for another CAT scan that morning, thinking they were going to go in and do brain surgery, and the blood clot had completely dissolved. And so there was no more blood clot that day. And so just because I still did have a fractured skull, though, I had to wear a helmet for the next year. So I don't think it affected me too much, but then there are times now, even as an adult, like my kids and my husband, we all learn these memory verses together, and they just get them so fast. And there are times where I'm my 1 to their 10 memory verses that they've learned. So if I ever forget your name when you talk to me, just know I wore a helmet for a year. So those are the two different times I can remember as a child, just hearing the voice of God and just knowing that He was present in my life. And then, so my parents, my dad grew up, pretty strict Catholic background. He went to Catholic school and had a Catholic upbringing. And my mom was not Catholic, and so I think that was always kind of a source of, I wouldn't say contention, but just kind of, where do we go to church, And so we ended up in a church that just was not Spirit-filled, it was not Bible preaching, it was just a real kind of dry, monotonous, just not what we had experienced before. And so that was when we had moved to Pueblo West, and we kind of just settled in a church out there. And it's just what an impact your church community has on your walk. So even though I had a mama at home who was, praying over us, reading the Bible, it kind of left me with almost a warped sense of God's love for me, because so many of the times they were just telling us and I'm not trying to, don't take this out of context, because God is holy and reverent and all of that, but it just felt more of He's just on His throne of judgment, and just kind of forgot, to tell us, how much He loved us, and so I felt that left me with a sense of, I felt the greatest part of the story was kind of left out, the story of the Bible, where it was always just if you sin, this is what happened, God is not happy with sin. And no, He's not, but God loved us so much that, He sent His one and only Son to die for us so we could have a relationship with Him and live with Him in eternity. And here is Jesus, who lived a sinless life for each one of us, and took a beating that He did not deserve, had a death on the cross, and died with us on His heart and in His hands. And I think that was just left out. So I kind of always thought like, oh, no matter what I do, I can't live up to what God wants me to do. And I just always kind of felt like that part was missing. And even though I'm getting it at home, like just what an impact it has when you're not getting it at church, you know? And it just was like, okay. And so I can remember, you know, even though my mom's praying over us and all of that, and we'd go to church, and I just didn't feel filled or the joy that I felt from such a young age, you know? And so I don't know, I can't emphasize it enough, like as a mom of 4, to sit here and tell you the importance of what it is to have your babies in a Bible-preaching, Spirit-filled church, because it is something that will have such an eternal and lasting impact on them. And just knowing that, you know, you get to bring your kids to church and they get to see you worshiping God, putting your hands in the air, them going to nursery, getting loved up on by sweet ladies, them going to Kids City and getting to learn their memory verses, and just going to youth group and having a pastor who is on fire and leading them closer to God. Like, just what an impact that it has, more so than anything you can give them in their lives. And little disclaimer, it's not going to be easy because Wednesday nights and Sunday mornings are going to be the hardest days to get out of school. They really are, out of the house. They really are, because there is a real and present enemy that doesn't want you here. He doesn't want your babies to know God. He doesn't want that. And so it always is hard, but it is so worth it, because it will seem like inevitably Saturday night the baby's up all night TVing, or Sunday morning your toddler spills milk all over the kitchen table, or your teenager goes to get dressed and the pants that fit him last week now look like he's ready for a flood. And there's always going to be something. But if I can encourage you and tell you, keep fighting and keep pushing, because it is so important that your babies are here and that they are getting loved on by a community of believers that get to show them how to serve others and how to love others. And it's the most important thing that you can do for your children, is being a parent that is making sure that you are introducing them to a relationship with Christ and getting to see other believers serving just as Christ served. And I think it's just such a thing that I can't encourage you more on, that you just need to, as hard as it's going to be on Wednesday nights or on Sunday mornings, get to church, and the Lord will meet you there. He will meet you there. He'll meet you there as a mom, as a dad, to fill you up enough for the next week, and he'll meet your babies there, and he will tell you, he will show them just love, and it's so important. So it's the most important thing, to just make sure that your kids are there and you're getting them there. So as a child and kind of growing up through the years, we kind of continued through this church in Pueblo West, and I just I wasn't a bad kid, but I just didn't really feel the spirit in me, and it just was like, well, okay, let's go to church. And at the same time, my mom kind of started going through a lot of health issues. So she was a nurse at St. Mary Corwin, and for a lot of years, she worked on the burn unit, and then she was placed into the pre-op assessment, is what they called it, where she would interview patients before surgery. And so one day she was in there interviewing patients, and her copying machine caught on fire. And so that was back in the day of, before everything's on computers, so there's still like medical records and huge filing cabinets. And so she's trying to save as much stuff as she can. And so she was in there, trying to get the fire put out. Well, apparently at the time it had released a lot of toxic metals and chemicals into the air that she had breathed in. And so she started struggling and going through a lot of health issues. In fact, so much so that she couldn't even go to work, because all of the different chemical sensitivities she was having, she couldn't be around literally any type of scent or any type of chemical thing, and it would just cause this reaction in her where she'd either get hives, or if she had to wear gloves, her hands would just swell up. And so it kind of just started causing a lot of things. And at that time, I was a teenager, I think about 13, and looking back, you just always regret some of your decisions. And so I was kind of just that bratty teenager who was so upset because I didn't get to wear the, cucumber melon lotion, and I didn't get to wear the deodorant, and I'm wearing like the rock salt stuff from the health food store. And I just remember being so grumpy, like, oh, why do I have to like not wear all this stuff just because it bothers you? And couldn't wear hairspray because the smell of the hairspray would bother her, and just different things. And I can remember just kind of getting grumpy about it. And, looking back, you're like, oh, anyway, you kind of always regret sometimes the way you act. And so, so my mom was staying home, and she was just so amazing and so loving. So even through my bratty teenage years, she was always loving up on us and just taking such good care of us. And then, so she's kind of going through some of that, and I entered into high school, and, I felt like at the time I was just almost kind of like living off of her faith. She was praying for us, and, she was always the one there and making sure, we were praying and had a relationship with Christ, but it almost felt like it was more through her instead of me pursuing my own relationship with him. And so, so there was kind of that for a while. And then I remember, it was our freshman year of high school. I was with an older friend who could drive, and then another girl, and we went up to I can't remember which mall it was, but one of the malls up in Colorado Springs, and we were walking around, and before we know it, there's a group of, clean-cut, nice-looking young men that approach us, and, we thought they were closer to our age, I think I was 15 at the time, and so, but it turned out they were they were soldiers at a nearby base, and so, so they kind of kept talking to us, following us around the mall, and we were talking with them, and, I was always, I still was such a good kid and always worried about getting in trouble. And so I knew things probably weren't going to go the best. And so my other friend was like, oh, let's go back with these guys. Let's go hang out with them. And so when we found out that they were soldiers and they invited us back to the base, like, all the hairs on the back of my neck just stood up. I'm like, this isn't right. This isn't good, but it's before the time of cell phones. Imagine that. We didn't have cell phones. And so I can remember seeing a payphone there at the mall and thinking, I need to call my parents. But they knew I was going to be spending the night at the friend's house. That was always the plan from the beginning. And I just remember thinking and looking at that payphone and like stopping in my tracks and looking at it and thinking, I need to call them right now. And my friends kind of just kept going. They're like, come on, get in the car so we can follow him. And I'm like, So I got in the car, and of course, you regret so many decisions later in life. And so I knew, I just knew, the whole time I was like, I got to get out of this situation. I just got to get out of it. And so we ended up back at the academy with them, and just kind of things went from bad to worse. They all started drinking, and I was just sitting there like, oh, I don't know, how to get out of this. What do I need to do? And of course, girls kind of started pairing off with guys. And so it left me alone with just one guy in the room. And thankfully, he had been drinking enough that I think that was probably such a saving grace for me, is that he was so drunk. But, I guess I can say in the fact that I wasn't fully raped, that it was good, but the fact that a lot of things were done to me that were definitely against my will, but I was able to get away because he passed out from being so drunk, and I got out of the room, and I just remember running to my friend's car, and just thankfully it was unlocked, and they were both, and I didn't even know where they were. And so, I just remember laying there and hiding, literally on the back seat of her car, and just hunkering down onto the floorboard, and I started praying, but just immediate shame that came over me, and how quickly the enemy is to speak into our lives, because it bothered me so bad. I thought, oh Lord, here I was praying, and I just felt the enemy saying, how dare you pray to a holy God when you were this unclean girl? And I can remember just thinking that and thinking, oh God, I am so sorry. And just kind of that vision that I've had for so many years of God, sitting on his throne of judgment. That's what the enemy knew I had in my mind, and that's what he was sitting there telling me. And so I just felt so embarrassed and so ashamed, and I just
kept thinking like, oh, I am so sorry. Like, what a fool I am to let myself even get into this position, you know? And so I can remember just finally the next morning when I met up with him and we drove home, and I didn't tell anyone about it. Like, I didn't tell anyone because I was so embarrassed and I didn't want anyone knowing. And I just kind of bottled up all of those emotions inside. And so the good kid who never really got in trouble, I started hanging out with friends who liked to drink in high school. And so then I started going to the parties and drinking and just thinking, well, you know, I've lost God's love anyway, you know, like I'm such a, you know, like that's what I thought in my head. And so I can remember just going out and partying and drinking. And there was at one party, I can remember taking 14 shots of vodka, and I just was, I don't even really remember taking it. I just remember waking up in just my own pool of vomit, and I thought, oh, this is not good. Like this, I have to change. And so God has such a good way of timing. He does, because that was right when Chris and I started dating, and he is such a good, God-loving, fearing man. And even in high school, like he just, because forever I didn't tell him my story. He didn't know for a couple years, and I hadn't told anyone. And but he was just so good. Like he saw, we had been friends since Happy Land, and I think he could just see like something was wrong. And so kind of that friendship just kind of naturally bloomed into our relationship. And so I started coming to church with him again and coming back here to the Christian Center, which we had when I was little, but we came back again, and I was coming with his family on Sundays, and just finally like letting go of that weight that I was carrying. And I can remember just getting prayed over with Pastor Greg and just feeling like, okay, it's okay. Like God loves me. And you know, I remember just feeling like, oh, okay, it's good. So then Chris and I both attended college up in CSU in Fort Collins. And, you know, at the time, it was such a good time for us because we got really involved with campus ministry and going to church up there. And it was just such a neat time for us as a couple to just kind of grow in our relationship with Christ. And so after graduation, we moved back down here, and we built our house in Pueblo West, and he was working for his family's business, and I started teaching, and it was just such a fun, happy time in our life. It really was. We were at that fun newlywed stage, and we're decorating our new house, and we were just excited to be back to family again. And the teaching position that I had was actually at a house my parents' house was about 5 minutes away. And so that was always the plan, you know, when the kids come, my mom gets to watch the kids, and, you know, it'll be so easy to drop them off. And, you know, that's just how you plan things out in your life. And, you know, they don't always quite work out as you plan. And so, you know, that was always the thought. And so my mom and I, we truly were. We were best friends. I mean, we would talk every day. You know, I would call her on my way to work. She would pray over me, pray over the day, you know, and it just was always that encouragement. I would call her on the way home, and we would talk about everything. We'd go grocery shopping together. You know, we did so many ths together. And she would volunteer in my kindergarten class once a week and just come in and love up on those babies too. And it was such a wonderful time. And then, so that year, it was in 2007, Chris and I had been married a year at that point, and, you know, it was just, my mom was walking her dog in the neighborhood, and there was this old gravel pit kind of back behind our house where we'd always play when I was younger out in Pueblo West. And so anyway, my mom was out walking her dog, and a neighborhood dog kind of came and attacked him. And so she started dealing with some of the repercussions of that, of, you know, going to the doctors for different things, and her neck was always kind of bothering her from getting knocked down and this and that. And so that was in January, I think. And about 6 months later, in July of that same year, my dad and her were driving home from my grandparents' cabin up in Woodland Park, and they're coming down Ute Pass and just got rear-ended just really hard. You know, she went to the hospital. And from there on, it just life just changed so much, because
due to like all of her chemical sensitivities from when she was in the hospital working as the nurse, she just couldn't go and take like Advil or pain pills because then it would have kind of an effect inside of her body. So she was trying everything she could. You know, she was doing acupuncture to kind of help with the neck pain, and she was going to the chiropractor, all the things that she could to try to find and do things the natural way. But it was not going good because, I mean, poor thing, she could barely even like chew without the nerve pain and the neck pain in her face. And I'd say within a month, she had lost about 20 pounds. Like, she wasn't sleeping, she wasn't eating. She was just in this constant, severe, like agonizing pain, where to the point where like her nerve pain in her face was so bad that she would rub and rub and rub, and there would be just scabs on her face. And I can remember thinking, like, Mom, like, stop. Like, you need to, like, you know, like, what is going on, you know? And I can just remember, like, you know, sometimes not having the patience that I should have and thinking, well, what is going on, you know? And we'd pray healing over her, and it wasn't getting better. And so the morning of September 6th, I called her on my way to work like I do every morning, you know, and was talking to her, and I just felt like a distance from her, you know? I was like, Mom, did you hear what I just said? And, oh, yeah, honey, yeah, you know, I heard you. And I'm like, okay, you know, it felt off, you know? And so they say hindsight's always 20/20. So I went to work that day. Finally did have a cell phone at this point, but it was back in the like flip phone days, and you didn't always have it attached to you. And so I remember just putting my phone inside of my purse, tucking it away in the filing cabinet, you know, because you just didn't carry your phone around like we do nowadays. And so, it was the end of the day. I had taken all the kids, gotten them off to the bus and everyone home. And I happened to pull out my purse from the filing cabinet, and I saw like 10 missed calls from my dad. And I thought, well, that's strange, you know, why has he called so many times? Like, nothing is processing in my mind at all, because I just, you know, I'm like, oh, well, that's weird. Let me call him back. And so I call my dad back, and just his voice immediately, I'm like, what's wrong, Dad? Like, what is going on? And he's just crying and crying, and I can't even understand what he's saying. And I'm like, put Mom on the phone so I can understand what is going on. And then he just goes, she's not here. And I'm like, okay. And so still not really even thinking of anything. And so then his next question was, well, what school do you work at? Because he just couldn't remember the name of the school. And I said, well, Cedar Ridge. Like, what is going on? And so within minutes, there was a sheriff's officer there and said, you need to come with me. And so I just remember I had the most amazing principal, who actually was my third grade teacher growing up. And I just remember her just grabbing me and hugging me, just like, I'm riding with you. And so here we are riding in some sheriff's car, and I'm like so confused as to what is even going on, because like not a single thing has like hit my mind that there's like anything wrong, you know? And so I can just remember asking the sheriff's officer, I said, what is going on? Where is my mom? Like, what's the problem? And he goes, she shot herself. And I just stopped, and I was like, well, what? Like, suicide didn't even enter my mind. It truly didn't. Like, you know, my mom grew up on a ranch. We were around guns all the time. Like, I thought, well, maybe there was some type of gun accident. Like, what is this guy talking about? He surely has the wrong person. Like the thought of suicide truly never even entered my mind still at that point. And so I thought, well, maybe she's okay. Maybe there's just a gun accident and she's going to be fine. And then I just remember pulling up to the sheriff's station and just looking out and seeing my dad and his brokenness. And right then, that's when I knew it wasn't okay. And I just remember getting out and hugging him. And I just remember, just how, you know, just how numb I felt. I was like, this can't be real. Like, this isn't really happening. My mom wouldn't do something like that. And I just remember asking my dad what happened. And he got home from work, from the railroad, and just found her in the garage with a gunshot wound to the side of her face that was always hurting, and she was always rubbing. And
And so, I just remember being at the sheriff's station for a couple hours, and they're questioning, asking you all these things, and you were just like in complete and utter shock. And so once my brother got down from the springs, they finally kind of let us go, I guess. I don't know. And so, and that is something like with suicide, you don't even like realize like sometimes the people that find them are almost treated as suspects for a little while. And so it was like my dad was having to go through all this questioning of like, is this, like, is that really what happened? Or, and so I just remember my heart aching so much for him, thinking, oh, like, here he just found his wife of 30 some years, and he's getting questioned as to whether or not it was really that. And so we left there, and I just remember getting my dad back to his house, and there was still, we didn't even go near the garage because there's still like it was just a mess. And so we're asking my dad, like, what do you want to do? Are you staying here? Are you coming to our house? And my mom had this like prayer journal that she would always write stuff down on. And usually it was just prayers for our family. It was be with Jennifer today as she's teaching, or help John, my brother's an engineer, help him get through this project or that project. It was always just prayers about our family. And so I just happened to like go over to where that was, and there was absolutely nothing written for 2 months. There has been nothing written. And on that day, September 6th, the only thing that was written was, please God, help me. And I remember just looking at that, and the anger that hit me was just overwhelming. I remember thinking, God, like, where were you from my mom, who has done nothing but love you her whole life? And like, I just remember being consumed by the anger and just feeling like, how could you let my mom do this? And just questioning him and his goodness. And so I always hear stories of people who, are just, then I sometimes feel bad. I'm like, oh, I got angry with God. And there was a time for about a year and a half there where I didn't want to pray. I didn't want to talk to God because I was so mad at him. And yet again, I have a husband who is so gentle and kind and wonderful. And so I can just remember telling him about the day of my mom's funeral. I'm like, I was such a mess. Like, I had never felt such a loss in my life. And I remember telling him, I'm like, I don't think I'll ever be the same person that you married. Like, it's okay if you divorce me. Like, it's okay, because I don't feel like I'll ever be happy again. Like, that's how I felt. And I just remember him looking at me. He's like, Jennifer Lynn, like, stop it. Like, you're not, and he was so good and so patient with me, because he understood that I was angry. And, I just was like, no, I'm not going to church. No, I'm not praying. And so I was mad. And I can remember him taking me over here to come talk to Pastor Greg. And Pastor Greg was so sweet and so wonderful. But I just was like, I don't know. I don't know about I don't know about God. Like, I'm not even sure right now. And I felt so, just so unsure of my relationship with God. And I can remember just feeling like, I don't know if I can worship a God that would let my mom go through this. And I can just remember just how empty I felt, because not only had I lost my mom, I had completely shut God out of my life, and I had felt completely empty. And then about a month and a half after my mom died, kind of funny how the way things work, without even trying, we found out we were pregnant with Jake, our first one. And I always say that is why Jake is the most empathetic and like just kind-hearted and like emotional little kid, because I literally cried that entire pregnancy. Like, I cried all the time. And I just remember thinking, oh, like, the plans that we had of my mom watching the grandkids and all of that, like, it all had fallen out. And I thought, what am I going to do? Like, I was the baby of the family. I hadn't been around a lot of little ones. I didn't really know how to take care of kids. And I can remember just feeling nervous and not really sure of like, oh, okay, like, here we go. And so
just so happened that Jake was a very difficult baby. He was born a month early, and, we kind of dealt with some of that stuff of like jaundice and all that early on. But then he just would cry and cry and cry, like day and night. I mean, that kid hardly ever slept. He cried like 24/7. I remember Chris and I just being so exhausted. You're first-time parents, you have no idea what's going on, and you're just at that point of exhaustion. And I can remember, like, the only thing he liked was to be facing outwards and being bounced. Like, that was the only way he would ever quit crying. Well, come to find out later on, when he was about 7 months old, he was finally diagnosed with torticollis, with some stuff with his neck. And so as soon as we got him into a infant chiropractor, like within days, he was a completely different child, like completely different. But as you're going through it, you're sitting here like complete exhaustion with a baby that never quits crying, and you're like, I don't even know if I'm a good mom. I have no idea. Like, I just felt like I was failing at motherhood. Like, I really felt like I was failing. I'm like, here I have a baby that literally doesn't quit crying, and I don't have a clue what I'm doing, bounce the baby. And I can just remember, like, I was teaching half day at that point, is when we had half day kindergarten. I would go to work in the morning and pick him up, and I can just remember, like, just feeling like anxiety every time I would go to pick him up from my mother-in-law, because I just felt like, oh, here we go. We're going to be crying the rest of the afternoon, the rest of the night, just to do it all over again. And I just remember one day, he was probably about 4 months old, and just holding him and just feeling exhausted and overwhelmed. And like, for the first time, the thought of hidden in my mind of like, well, I can see why my mom did what she did. And I remember thinking that, and then just feeling so overwhelmed with life that I was like, I can't do this, like, I'm not made to do this. And in that moment, I just remember setting him in his crib and looking at him and falling to my knees. And that was the first time in like a year and a half that I had prayed. And I just, my hands in the air, I just kept saying, God, please help me. Like, please help me, because I don't ever want to have a thought like that again. And I can remember just crying and crying and asking for forgiveness and asking God to forgive me for being so angry. And I just remember this weight just being lifted off of me and feeling like, oh, it's going to be okay. And I kind of feel like the Holy Spirit was, you always hear the Bible story, and as you're a kid, I just remember always hearing the story of the Israelites, and after they leave Egypt, and I can remember always hearing that story and thinking, as they're complaining about everything, thinking, well, these fools, like, do they not see all the miracles that have just happened? Like, who are these people to just keep complaining when God is so good to them, has delivered them from slavery, and is giving them all of these things? And I remember always reading that as a child and thinking, well, these people are just foolish, And I remember in that moment, as I'm crying and praying and hands lifted in the air, I just remember, like, God just kind of put that story into my heart, like, Jennifer, like, look up, like, look around you, look at the blessings in your life. You have a beautiful baby, an amazing husband, like, you're going to miss the blessings if you don't start lifting your head up and opening your eyes. And I'd like to say it was like an immediate transformation, but apparently I'm a little thick-headed and still slower. And so, but I remember just finally feeling like, okay, like I wanted to come back to God and start knowing him again. And so we lived on the north side of Pueblo West, and we thought, oh, it's such a far drive to the south side, And so we were kind of trying to find churches that were a little closer over there. And so, we were kind of going around and just never felt really at home anywhere. We would try a church for 6 months, and we were like, and we'd try something else for about 6 months. And so then finally we kind of got settled again back over here at the Christian Center, and just how much it felt like home. And, I still struggled, I still wasn't completely in a good place with God, and I still was just feeling overwhelmed, because I think at that point we had Tate already, and you're working full time, you have kids, and you're just like, And so there was a really good girlfriend of mine from high school. They gave me a book that it was called 1,000 Gifts by Ann Voskamp, and she is this writer who writes like poetry. It just is like the most soul-soothing writing, and it just spoke right to me. And so basically it was a book like talking about like all the hardships, everyone deals with something, but the whole point of the book was, can you write down 1,000 things that you're thankful for? And so like changing your attitude to one of gratitude. And so what a like shift it did in my head, it just helped me to realize, wow, like I have so much to be grateful for. And as a mom, I think so many times we do things that kind of go under the radar. We're doing the laundry, we're cleaning, we're driving kids everywhere, and I think there are times when you just don't feel, validated or recognized, as a mom. And so I can remember reading that book and thinking, it's okay because I'm serving my family, and that's, God sees that, Jesus sees that I'm serving them and I'm loving them, and just kind of realizing that, wow, okay, the tasks that I do, if I actually do them with happiness and gratitude, then just how much it changes like the dynamics of our whole family. So instead of, grumping about the pile of laundry that's so high, I can remember just like starting to pray out loud, okay, Lord, thank you. Like, thank you that I have 4 healthy babies that get to run around and dirty their clothes all the time, or cleaning up the kitchen all the time. I can remember just changing it from, more dishes to do, to, Lord, thank you. Thank you that we have food. Thank you that we have a house to live in, and just kind of shifting my attitude over time. And it really did just have such an impact on me in my walk with Christ. And so if I could just encourage the mamas out there, because it's an overwhelming job. And sometimes you feel overwhelmed and unseen. And so I think if I could just encourage you to just serve your family and to do it with love and gratitude, and how much it'll change just the dynamics of your home and your family. And I really do think like, we just need to focus more on that. And so, anyway, so I think, we're kind of, I'm to a point now in my walk with Christ where I look back to where I was, so many years ago, and I think, wow, like just how good our God is, and how faithful and how gracious and how gentle he is, to just want to pursue us, when I was acting like a brat, I was angry at him. I didn't want to talk to him, and yet he kept pursuing me. And when I finally came around, he was right there with open arms. And so one of my favorite verses, Lamentations 3:23, his mercies are new every morning. And just knowing that every morning I get to wake up and pray and talk and just have a relationship with Christ. And it just is something that, no matter what you've done, no matter what your past holds, I hope you know that there is a God that is fighting for you, and there is a God that loves you no matter what. And so if you are hearing this, I just pray that you are able to talk to somebody or reach out to somebody. Find me after church and I will hug you and love up on you. But I just hope you know that there is nothing that you could have done that will stop a wonderful God from loving you. And so that's my prayer for this whole thing.